as my name is Chardon Black. I'm a student in CMSD. I go to the Cleveland School of Science and Medicine, and I'm also currently an Unsilenced Voices blogger. I've been an Unsilenced Voices blogger for about a year now, and it's been one of the most influential aspects, extracurricular activities I've had so far. And I'm glad to be doing this right now. Another aspect of it. So recently, I've been working on a story surrounding diversity and the effects of diversity on a student's education. And I've had a student's interview, and I've understood their perspective of diversity and how it could affect their education. I've had a teacher's point of view and how they feel diversity can affect the student's education. And so far, I was looking to do a administrator, and that administrator just so happens to be the CEO of the district. So I'm very happy to have you here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So, just to begin, could I have like a demographic breakdown of students across CMSD, if that's
Yes.
possible?
Yeah. So we are about 64% African Americans or Black students. Um, and that includes Black American or, if we have Dominican students, so it's all of the Black population.
Hmm.
We have about 17% Hispanic students. Most of those students are Puerto Rican, although we're seeing a larger influence of Mexican culture and some other cultures. We have about 14.5% white students. And then we have about 4.5% that identify in other categories. Those typically are Asian American, um, multiracial. There's a very, very small number of Native students, and that's actually because of the way our country classifies people. A lot of Native people are undercounted, and
Hmm.
so very, very small number of Native people as well.
And thank you for that. I was
Mhm.
wondering, like, what's your perspective on that? Like, do you believe it's diverse? Could it be better? The student population in specific.
Well, it's one of the things I love about the district is that we are a diverse community, and one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about it, but you know, diversity presents itself in different ways. So we are a majority minority district,
Hmm.
and people talk a lot about the east side is black and the west side is white. That's actually not true when you look at our student demographics. We've only got 14% of our students who are white, and actually many of them are in the Slavic village community as well. And so I actually think our diversity is one of the things I like best. I think though it's also a very clear body of evidence about the structural racism that is prevalent here. We are the sixth most racially segregated city, so
Hmm.
you can go immediately outside of our boundaries, and this is where west and east does matter, and you're not going to find anywhere close to our demographics in Lakewood and Parma and the school districts that surround us. And so while I value and cherish it, and it's one of the things I love best about the district, it also is leading to a lot of the structural inequities that have emerged out of race and class issues over the past century.
Thank you. I really find that an interesting take. I didn't think of it that way yet. So that's interesting to see. Now I'd like to move on to the teachers themselves. Could I get a breakdown of the teachers population?
Sure. So for our teachers, our Asian American teachers is 2% of our workforce. So that's about what we might expect when you look at the Asian American student body being about that size.
Hmm.
Our Black teachers is only 24% of our workforce, and that's compared to the 64% of Black students. So that's a mismatch.
Hmm.
Our Hispanic is only 4% compared to 17%. So that's actually even more of a mismatch than our Black students as a percentage of gap. And then 67% of our teachers identify as white. We have a few that are multiracial and a few that don't respond in the demographics or don't identify, but about 67%. But what's interesting, I mean, that's important. What's interesting to me about that is when we get to our principal data, and then also when we get to how do we diversify our teachers. So I hope that those are questions that you're interested in as well.
Absolutely. So, what's your perspective on this diversity, like the diversity within the teachers?
So we know that teaching has largely been a white and female profession, particularly actually when people of color finally were permitted to do many other jobs instead of becoming a teacher or a nurse. So we know this is a challenge not only here, but across the nation. We also know that while it is critically important that a young person like you sees teachers that look like you, we
Mm,
also know that it's important that young people like me, when I was a little white kid, see diverse faculty. And so diverse teaching candidates are sought out not only to come into communities like ours to represent people who look like them, but also to go to other communities that are actively interested in having a more diverse faculty in front of their children. And so, one of the things that organizations like ours have tried to do is simply recruit all of the minority candidates that you can into the organization. And the reality is, if you run those numbers in Ohio, I could hire every minority teaching candidate available
mm.
in the state, and I would not make huge number changes here. So we have to think about how to diversify in a different way.
Like diversifying effectively.
Yeah, so for example, I gave you the 24% of teachers who are Black, but
Mm,
60% of our substitute teachers are Black, and 61% of our paraprofessionals are Black. So we are focused on a paraprofessional to teacher path, because if I can move that 61% of Black paraprofessionals through a para to teacher track where we are now paying their tuition to go to Cleveland State, and we're giving them a sabbatical to do their student teaching so that
mm.
they can become a teacher. And if we can figure out how to convert those substitute teachers to full converted teacher license, suddenly we have access to a lot of people with color who already work in our system that is in large, far larger numbers than I could recruit. So just in bare numbers, that's 790 people, physical people that I could convert to teachers. To give you a comparative sense, Central State University, which is the HBCU here in Ohio, has
Mm.
4 Black teacher candidates this year. 4. So I could recruit all 4, 100%, and I would not have budged my numbers. Or I could focus on converting 790 people or some big portion of them into teachers. And
Mm.
it's not actually an or, it's a both. But we have to get smarter about this, right? And that's what my team and I have been trying to do, is to say, like, we actually have these people right here. And we also know our paraprofessionals in particular live in the city, because a lot of our teachers, including our Black teachers, don't live in the city, and lived experience matters. And my lived experience is not just my skin color, but it's
Mm.
also where I live. So if I'm driving into the city and driving home to the suburbs, um, Black matters, but it doesn't counter the fact that I'm also not fully invested in the community. Like, I live in the city, right? So I have lived experiences that some of your peers may not, some of your teachers may not have, because they're driving in from the suburbs every day. And so if we can convert some of these people, and Connor just put in the chat, what's a paraprofessional? Paraprofessionals are those classroom aides, the PCIA aide that's in your school, the one-to-one aides. They're people already working in classroom settings. If we can help them finish their degree and become teachers, we're not only diversifying um, the ethnic diversity, but we're also diversifying the people who actually live in the city they're serving and have a more day-to-day lived understanding. They're not afraid of our neighborhoods, all the things that play into really knowing you and your peer students.
So that plays back into your idea of, this smart way of diversifying. You can't just go out and hire people who are diverse, but you have to make sure that they're like, I would say like academically capable, all already within the classroom environment, as you mentioned, with substitutes and paraprofessionals.
Right. And so if you take it even one step backwards from there, so you're a junior, I'm guessing that you're already eyeballing your college options just by talking to you, but there's some peers who don't plan to go straight to college right now. So what if I had created a senior academy, and I'm working on this, What if I create a senior academy that says to one of your fellow students who doesn't plan to go on to college, we will train you senior year to get your paraprofessional license, to be one of those classroom aides. We will hire you before you graduate high school to work in a CMSD classroom the following fall under a teacher. And assuming you like teaching and you like being in the classroom, then we will pay you, because now you're one of those paraprofessionals, we'll pay you to go to college and we'll give you your student teaching. So now we can even tap into our own student population who often are falling off because they weren't college bound, and actually reintroducing them into good work that can continue to help us to diversify over time. So you can start to see a pathway that doesn't just count on getting students to go to college and choose teaching and then be recruited all over the state or country, but that we're building our own in a really deliberate way.
Absolutely. I really like that idea. So moving on to like CMSD as a whole, I heard you did mention principal data in terms of demographic. So what about those individuals? What's
So
that break?
here's a place I think we can be really proud. 59% of our principals are identify as African American or Black. 59%. Remember, the student population 64%. So it's almost a one-to-one match. Now, where we don't stack up is only 7 of our principals or administrators identify as Hispanic. So again, we have a real gap problem in our Hispanic or Latino community. And then 32% identify as white. So, so what that tells us is that both through recruiting and through grow your own programs, because a lot of these principals were our teachers, that we are finding and promoting teachers, Black teachers, into school leader roles. And so that's
Mm,
something I'm actually really proud of, because that actually defies what we see in a lot of the statistics. And these are people that have a lot of influence, right? And so it's an important statistic for us to continue to pay attention to and to continue to grow. But it's a place where we're defying the odds. Now, again, we have to really think differently about our Hispanic or Latino community because the numbers across the board just don't match. The one exception is our paraprofessionals. There are 14% of our paraprofessionals. So again, we can do that parrot a teacher, but we are not converting teachers to principals in the same way, and don't have enough to represent the Latino population in the same way that we do at the principal level for Black administrators.
mhm. All right. So considering all that data as a whole, how do you think diversity could affect the education of students in CMSD?
Well, again, we actually know from data and evidence that students who have at least one teacher who looks like them, who they identify with from their ethnicity and race background, are more likely to have positive academic traits. They're likely to have better grades. They're likely to get in less trouble. They're likely to attend school more. They're more likely to graduate. They're more likely to go to college. I will also say, though, that it is critically important, and we must also make sure that we don't have those very people who don't relate well to our kids for other reasons because of socioeconomic matters or things of that nature. And that's why I was making the point about getting a teaching force that actually is diverse in where they came from and where they live. And so I'll use myself as an example. Is I obviously am not Black, and I'm never going to fully know the Black experience that you have lived, but I did grow up in really some pretty poor circumstances. And so I do understand some of the impacts of poverty. And I bring that to my work, and I have an empathy of working with young people who are experiencing those kinds of poverty. And so you could have a Black teacher, as just one example, who good that you can identify with that teacher because he or she's African American. But if that teacher grew up in a suburban experience, may still not understand some of the things you and your peers are experiencing. So I think we have to think about diversity is first, we have to be very focused on ethnic diversity. Next, we have to make sure that it's only one dimension of identity and that we're really making sure that we're fully a diverse community from the student and the adult perspective. The other thing that we have to think about is how to ensure that more men are in the profession, more Black men are in the profession, and that when Black men are in the profession, they are not relegated to being the disciplinarian, being, and carrying that role that only Black men can discipline Black boys and girls. That's not true. We can get Black men to be counselors, and we can get Black men to be leaders. And so, we actually have an affinity group where we bring our Black male leaders together. It's called MOCA. And it is to provide a support system to say we really want to lift up and elevate and support Black male leaders in this district. And we've taken the stance that Black male leadership is bigger than the classroom or the school. So this includes the leaders of our security department, the leaders, we want to send a signal that we care about Black men explicitly because of how few Black men are actually in the profession.
Mhm. I love that point you spoke to before, diversity extending beyond just race. You have economic groups, gender, geographic. Yeah, I just really like that point in general. So, we're going to go down a little bit more specific. How could diversity affect like teacher relationships with each other, with the district, with principals?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're really working hard on in the district is what we call bringing your whole self to work. So
Mm,
I really, really want the adults in the system to be able to embrace all of their markers of identity, both those that you can check off in a box that you're Black or white, that you're male or female, that you identify as straight or in the queer community, but also, the things that maybe are less check markable. We really want people to bring their whole self to work. And so we're doing a few things that I think are really important. The first is in 2019, we actually started conducting an employee survey about how our employees experience the organization from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And
mm,
what we thought at the time is we were just going to go out and pick a survey and administer it. It turns out there was no such thing. So we actually had to work with a research firm to build the survey. And that research firm actually now sells our survey to other school districts. So it's really pioneering. It's really groundbreaking. We do it every other year. And then we use that data to get smarter about how to help grow our diverse workforce community. And my bet is that if you as an adult that works in this district can bring your whole self to work and you feel wholly valued, then you're going to bring your best self to Chardon's classroom, right? But if you walk in the door feeling less valued, then you're not going to bring your best self into Chardon's classroom. And so that's the bet, right? And so things that came out of that, as an example, we got a lot of feedback that we needed diversity training for management. And so we worked with Cornell University and created a 9-part management training series that every district manager has gone through, including me. And now on a quarterly basis, every new hire goes through as well. And we actually get now a badge in our employee record, just like you get a grade or a transcript or whatever, or a seal. We
mm,
do too. So that came out of it. We also got a clear signal that people wanted to feel that diversity was important and celebrated. And so I send out messages very routinely celebrating all kinds of diversity. So, for example, this month is Native American Heritage Month. And so on Tuesday, which was the first of the month, I sent out a message talking about when did this month get created, what was the inspiration for it, what should we know. I mentioned earlier about how we undercount Native Americans in this country. They're actually identified as the invisible people. And you can almost not find any history of Native people beyond the 1900s.
mm.
So even as poorly reported as Black history is in a history book, that's even worse in the Native community because they're not in the history book.
Mm.
The last thing we have is, the the old-fashioned notion of taking over the country, but we forget that there are still natives. Cleveland was actually a native resettlement center back in the day when we were trying to whiten the native community.
Mm.
And so we have native people here who get undercounted because they were told to identify as white, or if they identify as multiracial, even that hides their native. So that's just one example. So we put them out for everything though. So I put them out for that. I put them out for, you know, the LGBTQ month, put them out for things like, National Bus Drivers Day. Let's recognize our bus drivers as important people, because that's an indicator of your work identity, right?
Absolutely.
So that came out of it. Um, we just finished creating, and another really excited, a 6-part series called CMSD Equity and Me. And we're now taking teams through it. And again, I've been through it because I'm trying to lead by example, where schools and departments go through 6 90-minute sessions. And the last session is where they identify an action plan of how they're going to really intentionally focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so every school or department then identifies the community action guide for their school, where we bring them together and say, okay, what are you working on? What help do you need? So it's led us to really intentionally, tackling issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really making it a named priority in the district.
Mm.
Just one last example is, that we're starting the PACE career curriculum. One,
Yes.
one of the things we did last year, and I'm excited to do again, we want you as students to know what work affinity groups are, where when you are in the world of work, you should look for how does your employer support Black people or Black men, or, well, so we want that for young people to learn now. And so we actually held a affinity group for students of Cleveland who identify in the queer community. And we did it with the LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce, where they
Mm.
hosted, here are businesses and companies that are friendly to the queer community, and therefore you might want to consider working with them for. And so it's those kinds of things that we're trying to embed into the system as day-to-day practices that create a system that not only tries to get the right numbers on paper, but actually tries hard to signal in every move that we actually care, that it actually matters to us, and it's more than a numbers game.
Absolutely. So really trying, I'm just going to restate so I make sure I understand. You're really trying to normalize these methods of conduct that go beyond just having those data sets, but actually appreciating the diversity within CMSD that we already have.
Exactly, exactly. And so thinking about what are all the ways that happens, and so I'll give you a couple of examples.
Hmm.
So when people apply for a job in like my office, they have to do a written exercise of how they would tackle a problem. And I screen those exercises without knowing who the people are, so that I can't apply a bias to say, oh, that sounds like a white person, or it sounds like a woman, or it sounds like and I've had typically white people say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let you take my intellectual property. And I've said to them, then you are applying in the wrong place, because I'm not after your intellectual property. I am after the very best candidate. And if you don't want to compete when we can't tell the color of your skin, you are in the wrong place, right? So that's an example. Another example is that, there's a lot of evidence that um, women's voices are often not heard in meetings in the same way men's voices are, and that men interrupt women more frequently than women interrupt men. And so I actually am very deliberate in my meetings with my team to pause and invite my female chiefs to say, Liz, I haven't heard from you. Do you have something to share on this? Because I know that that's a thing, right? And then one just for about, thinking about how people identify. I used to talk about people that I admired and say, she is an incredible woman or he is an incredible man. And I have really worked hard now to say she is an incredible person. She's
Hmm.
not just the best of a woman, she's the best of people. she's the best of who people should be, right? But it's trying to bring that level of intentionality that gets beyond. There are lots of places out there that are trying to get the right numbers so that they can pat themselves on the back. It's about a way of being that we're after.
Mhm. All right, I really enjoyed that part. So, up a level, once again, how do you feel diversity could affect the lives of district administrators such as yourself?
Well, again, it's why I'm here. You know, I actually I most of my career has been in urban education. Um, I actually left urban education for about 6 years. I worked in a very affluent suburban school district where almost everybody was white and wealthy, and it was not filling my mission, and that's what brought me to Cleveland 16 years ago. Um, I I have, I live in the city.
Mhm.
Um, I have become very comfortable and at home in a diverse community. Um, and when I'm, not in it, I notice it. I notice that, like, I went camping with a friend of mine one time, and we went to this diner way out in the middle of the country in Ohio. And I felt really uncomfortable. And I couldn't figure out at first why I felt uncomfortable. When I looked around, everybody was white, and I'm just not used to it anymore. So for me, it's a part of what fulfills me is to be in a community that is diverse and that we like each other and we get along and we understand that we have similarities and differences, and we value that, as opposed to some of the stuff that we're seeing happening in much more, white suburban communities. So for me, I think it's important that way. But I also think we need, whether it's me or whether it's a person of color, we need champions to recognize that these are systemic and generational issues. And so it's about how do we continue to challenge these systems to behave differently, which is something I've really tried to take on. And then knowing, as an administrator, when and how it's appropriate to use your voice and when and how it's not. And so I'll give you an example that I still I really appreciate the person saying this to me. So when the George Floyd murder happened,
Mhm.
I put out a really strong statement because, like many, I was really angry, and it was like it was just another one, and like enough is enough. And I'm usually about like do the work, but sometimes somebody just has to say something. And so I put it out. And a friend of mine who is a Black male superintendent in an urban community in Ohio called me and said, I just have to thank you for doing that, because I didn't put a statement out because, as a Black male, I thought people were going to say, well, of course you say that, you're a Black male. And when you put yours out as a white man, I had the courage to put mine out too. And so there's sometimes that, like, you have to know when and how to use your voice. And I will also say, though, and I'll tell on myself, there are times when you can get too comfortable and forget that, as much as you value being part of a diverse community, you're not a member of the community, right? And so I remember one of the times that I got myself in trouble because I was a little bit too familiar in the way I approached an issue in the Black community as a white man, right?
Mhm.
So I think it becomes ever more important as you have more and more power, or influence, to be even more aware and intentional of how you're using that. And when we teach about diversity, we always teach three columns. If you think about three columns, so we
Person.
think about me as a person, right?
Mhm.
And who am I and what's my identity? And again, I value all markers of identity. So, race, gender, sexuality, religion, all of, politic, all of those things. That's the personal. The other side is the structural, which we know is real. But most of us feel like, yeah, but I can't do anything about that, right?
Mhm.
But then the middle, we call it local. And the middle is, yeah, you may not be able to change the system, but everybody has influence over somebody. And so are you being intentional about your influence? So your teacher has influence over you. Is he or she being intentional from a diversity perspective about that influence that he or she has. Ms. Perez has influence over you and her teachers. Is she being intentional about that? I have it over many of you, right? Am
Mhm.
I being deliberate about that? So for me, the more authority, which is the kind of power that you're assigned by being an administrator, the more authority and power you have, the even more important caution you need to take in how you use that power, and being really intentional about, are you using your power in an intentionally positive way? Because poor intention is the worst, but lack of good intention can be every bit as bad, right?
Mhm.
So you're just doing bad stuff because you're not paying attention, right? Martin Luther King talked about this, right? Like, it's not bad enough that you have enemies, but when your friends don't act, that's a problem too. Well, that can be a lack of intentionality. So for me, the core of the answer to your question is, the more that you are given at, in this case, in positional leadership, the more responsibility you have to how you use it.
Absolutely. As you were saying your answer, this idea kept ringing in my head of that old saying that came up in like Spider-Man and stuff. With great power comes great responsibility. And I just kept
Amen. Yep, exactly.
absolutely. So I
Well,
do consider it of your time. So I just have one more question. So
okay.
from a personal perspective, overall, what does diversity mean to you?
So we actually define diversity, equity, and inclusion each. We actually have spent time writing our definition of diversity in the district, and I lead our diversity team, even though I'm the white guy. But I want to signal from the very top of the organization that it matters. And so I'm actually flipping to our definition. I can share it with you. So we want it to be a workforce, in our case, and a student body that encompasses all of the characteristics of identity. And you've heard me say this over and over and over again, is that I want people to bring their whole self to work. So whether it be race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, ability, gender, age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, uh, expression, title, citizenship, all of that, but for the purpose of valuing the richness of varied experiences and perspectives. And there is lots of evidence that organizations and communities that are diverse, because they value the diversity, actually perform better than those organizations that are not diverse. Now,
Mhm.
just putting people together does not create the value. You actually have to believe it. And I will say, as a person who lives in the white world, I get the cloak of whiteness where I walk into a room where everybody's white and then they can say what they really believe, and think that we all believe the same thing. And so that's why I haven't spent tons of time on the kind of the national, let's have the difficult conversations, because what those are often doing is teaching white racists what not to say and when not to say it, as opposed to investing in finding and bringing together people who really value the richness of the experiences and the perspectives that diverse communities share, and driving those people who don't out. you know
Absolutely. Thank you. So, you know, that's the last of my questions. But I would for the last few minutes, I just would like to have a back and forth because out in Andover, Massachusetts, I am a board member for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee for Phillips Academy. So it was really interesting seeing your perspective on this, and it's really nice seeing like such a high level like administrator individual with such unique perspectives on it. And I really do appreciate you doing this interview.
No, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate having the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I don't be surprised if I end up taking your policies back to Andover because like this meeting was very big for me and like it was a very epiphanies of you.
I'm guessing that they probably need some pushing.
Yes, I tell you what, I did have an intriguing summer.
I can only imagine. I'm sitting over at Cleveland State right now because I was in a meeting there, and then I'm sitting here to do this one.
Mhm.
And we're working on how Cleveland State can better support students that come from CMSD into Cleveland State. But one of the things that I shared with them is that, yes, they have a lot more to do. But when I talk to some of my um, higher education peers in smaller white rural communities who
Mhm.
say they want to recruit Black and brown students, but then have no support systems in place to help Black and brown students thrive, and then blame the Black and brown student for their failure, right?
Mhm.
And like it boggles their mind, you know. And I said, think about Cleveland. So you asked our demographics. So 86% of my students are people of color. So they're
Mhm.
minorities, yes, but they're minorities who live largely in a community of other minorities. And so while they've experienced all the harshness that being a minority can bring, they've also experienced a sense of community while they're dealing with it. Now, let's say you, Chardon, go to this school that's all white, and you are not just a minority in a minority community, you are the minority.
Mhm.
There's no one to talk to. There's no one that understands your lived experience. There's no support system when you feel isolated, which can lead to depression. There's no one that can teach you the rules of the white world and how things work, right? And it just boggles their mind. And I have to believe, being on that board, that you probably experienced some of those very things where they feel woke and they got a lot of waking to do.
Yeah. So, I would like to open the floor to another blogger who did come in a few minutes ago. Abdul, if you did have a question, I'd like you to, voice it to him just because we have 4 minutes.
And I've got
Just
a little flexibility. We're okay.
all right.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Abdul, and I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Great, Abdul.
Um,
Nice to meet you.
we've met in person a few times, me and Chardon, or Chardon and I, at the banquet at Water or Ice on Water, something downtown, something like similar. Um,
Windows on the river?
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That name is
Yep.
troubling. Um, I missed a few questions from Chardon, but I'm just gonna go over and see if I can get a definite understanding. How diverse would you say CMSD is?
Well, so we did talk about this and we recorded it too. So you'll be able to go back and watch,
Mm, mm,
Abdul. As a student population, we're 86% children of color. We are largely African American, 64% Black. We are about 17% Hispanic or Latino, with that largely being a Puerto Rican community and starting to see a growing Mexican community. We are about 14.5% white and about 4.5% other, including Asian American, refugees, um, a very, very small and undercounted Native population. So from a student population perspective, we're actually pretty diverse, but it also is an indicator of the racial segregation of this city. So Cleveland is the sixth most racially segregated city in the country. And you can go into the school districts that bound us, from west to east, and you're going to see very different demographics, particularly on the west, like a Lakewood, a Parma, and that sort of thing. So it's a richness for us, but it's also the result of a lot of historical inequities, and structural inequities that got us here. From a faculty perspective, and we talked a lot about this, so I would encourage you, to the extent you're interested, to go back and listen to where we are and what we're doing about it. Like many across the country, our teaching force is 2/3 white, a quarter Black, and then the other portion, a variety of other ethnicities. So that's a challenge, and one we're trying to tackle in multiple ways. And I talked with Chardon about a number of the efforts we have underway to diversify our teaching force. The good side of that, though, is our principal force is 59% Black and 32% white. So we're much more close to the student population for administrators, which means we are identifying and promoting out of our Black teacher corps into our school leader role. Where we really struggle on every indicator is in Hispanic or Latino. Very small numbers in our teacher corps and our principal corps. Slightly better numbers in our teacher aide corps that we could recruit from, but even they are smaller than the population.
mm. Um, and more specifically, I'm not sure if you answered this question before, but how does this impact the education of the students and the people overall in the CMSD?
Well, yeah, we did talk a little about this too. We know for a fact, we know through research that young people who see people who look like them as their teachers and administrators are more likely to have better positive indicators, things like grades,
Mm.
attendance, discipline, graduation rates, college going rates. So we know it's really important to have a workforce that represents the community they're serving, but it's also insufficient. So we need a workforce that not only looks like you, but also identifies with your whole identity. And so I use the example of we know lots of teachers live in the suburbs and then they come in and work in urban communities where they may be a Black teacher working in a school with Black children, but they don't fully have a lived experience of what a current Black student who might live in poverty is experiencing compared to a Black teacher living in a suburban middle class lifestyle. So it is an important indicator, and we have the research that shows it, but we have to think about other dimensions of diversity if we're really going to leverage the best of what diversity can bring from a teaching workforce perspective.
Just a couple more, but I do think the same. Um, are there any plans moving forward to address this diversity issue,
Yeah,
and
we got
teachers
about a half
and
an hour
students?
of our conversation about that. So yes,
Mm.
so one is recruiting, but I was using the example of Central State University as an example. So that's our HBCU here in Ohio that has an education program, and there are 4 candidates of color graduating this year out of Central State. So if I recruited 100% of them, all 4, I would not make a dent on my numbers. And you know that everybody else is also recruiting those same 4 students. So we do have to keep up recruitment, but we also have to look at, we have a lot of teaching aides. 61% of our teaching aides in our classrooms are Black. And so if I want to diversify my Black teaching corps, let's build a parent teacher program, which we've now done. We're paying paraprofessionals to go to college. We're paying for it. And then we're giving them a sabbatical to do their student teaching so they don't have to quit their job and lose their health benefits to become a teacher. 60% of our substitute teachers are African American. So how do I help those substitute teachers become credentialed teachers? And so we're creating a substitute to teacher pathway as another way to diversify our workforce. And then thinking about the number of young people that graduate out of the district that are not planning to go to college, how do I encourage them to become a teaching aide in the first place, to find out if they like teaching, and then that refills the pipeline of people that I can then encourage to become a teacher. So those are some examples of it. There's a lot more that we recorded that you can go back and watch if you'd like, but those are a few examples of efforts we're trying to do.
It seems Chardon has beat me to the best questions, but I will go back and review
Hey,
them.
Abdul, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. I think with the amount of time we have left here, Eric, could you maybe just do one more quick question?
Yeah,
Okay,
we're good.
let's do one more here, and Chardon or Abdul, either one of you can take it here. And I really appreciate you guys hopping on here.
Okay. So, apologies in advance. This may be a bit irrelevant, but how was your day, Mr. Gordon?
How was what?
Your day.
I will tell you that I had a really tough day today, and this experience and the next 2 that I am going to have will have made this a tremendous day. Um, I've been in Cleveland 16 years, and this is my 12th year as CEO, and I mean it every time. Why I love this work is because of all of you. And so this conversation will be the best conversation I've had all day. When we're done, I'm walking across the street to a whole bunch of middle school kids who are doing their poetry slam, and I'm going to be reading a original piece of poetry that I wrote about my identity, actually, to hundreds of CMSD middle school students. And then when that's done, I'm going over to Glenville High School or Collinwood complex because Glenville football is in the championship. So I'm ending my day doing 3 things that bring me joy.
Amazing to hear. Thank you.
And if you
That's
want, I will
incredible.
actually read you my identity poem.
Oh, please.
Oh my gosh, this is the bonus of the century
Please.
here. Oh my gosh. Thank you.
I'll tell you the backstory of this poem, and then I'll actually read it to you. So you know that I've shared that I'm stepping down at the end of this school year, and that was a really difficult personal decision for me because I really love this work, and I love all of you, and I think of you as my own kids. Um, but I know it's the right thing to do for the district, and so I had to do that, right? But so right after I announced that, I went to a workshop where they asked us to do this little poem thing, and I'm feeling very personal about it right now. And so my poem ended up being about my identity. So it's titled "How Did I Get Here?" And it reads, "We are blue collar, farmers, truck drivers, factory workers who shower after work. How did I get here? We are expansive country roads, ham and muskrat dinners. I thought you were dead in a ditch. How did I get here? We are outhouses, government cheese, generic cereal in a bag, and powdered milk. How did I get here? We are coveralls, time cards, punching in, piecework, and swing shifts. How did I get here? We are dropouts, voc ed, diplomas, not college. How did I get here? I am well educated, live in the city, shower before work, wear a shirt and tie, and live a comfortable life. How did I get here? That's my original poem.